Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bone. Today we have Kevin Robell, and he is one of the owners of Preventicx. And I wanted to have Kevin on because in the show we are working to provide tangible strategies to leverage negotiations for better outcomes, either compensation or trying to create more positions or different ways to better your athletic training clinic. So I came across Kevin on LinkedIn, and I thought it was a really interesting business, and I think that more athletic trainers need to know that this option is out there. So Kevin, if you want to give a little introduction of how you started this business and what you were doing before that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby. Thanks for having me on. It's kind of an interesting story. Conceptually, Preventicx started as a grant back in 2000, and I think it was 2014. The Pac-12 was just starting the Student Athlete Health and Wellbeing Initiative that was getting some legs, getting off the ground, getting really organized, and they needed infrastructure. They needed a system in place to help meet their specific aims, which was something to monitor injury trends, to provide schools with a way to compare their own injury trends to conference trends, to have an objective way to measure the effect of rule changes on certain sports and across the conference, and then finally a research database for researchers to kind of answer questions around student athlete health and well-being. So that was the framework, and I was an associate athletic trainer working in the Pac-12, kind of your standard run-of-the-mill kind of administrator looking for the next chapter of my career, and I was the IT guy and kind of the tech kind of administrator. So we went through a small handful of EMRs, different kinds of technology, and I had noticed that the purpose of data in sports medicine athletic training, the purpose of that data was changing. Historically, sports medicine data has been used mainly to pay insurance claims for very straightforward patient care transactions, and that's basically it. But the technology that we were seeing starting in the late first decade of the 2000s, more in the 2010s, we had this real big influx of technology. Healthcare was firmly moving all of their records to the cloud. This concept of the cloud came around, and I think the purpose of the utility of data has changed. And because now the questions that we're asking of that data have completely changed. We're asking our clinical data to sometimes predict injuries. Well, that's an interesting conversation. We're asking it to help us out with clinical prediction supports, and we're asking very new questions that I think we might get into that conversation a little bit later, but we really didn't have an answer for that. And that's kind of where the concept of the company was born. And it's kind of a mashup of this concept of preventative analytics. That was kind of where the company came from. Back in 2014, I was kind of that person on our staff that was helping us kind of prepare for that new reality. All the technology we were investing in, all the infrastructure we were investing in, it was to take advantage of the new this new utility of data. And that's kind of where we help athletic training departments and sports medicine organizations kind of make this transition to that new reality of data. to help them create and execute a data strategy so that they're prepared, kind of moving into the next phase, and we're able to deliver that through through an outsourcing partnership. We're in the weeds with you. We're helping these organizations from start to finish either polish up an existing data strategy or create a whole new data strategy based on their specific challenges.
Gotcha. So developing strategies and data workflows to maximize the return on investment with the data you already are collecting.
Yeah.
I think I pulled that right from your website, which makes total sense.
Yeah. It's I think something, and I'm sure our conversation will kind of evolve over the time together. And I think that's the way I found to give back to the profession. We always kind of go through changes in our career, and me being more left-brained, there's got to be a way I can help athletic trainers out and the profession out as we navigate through this kind of data economy.
Yeah. So it sounded like you guys started more with injury prevention data. Are there other data forms that you guys are collecting also with this, or are you guys taking that injury prevention data and deriving it from more specific data, if that makes sense?
I don't, the purpose, just kind of going off of the premise we just talked about, the purpose of data has changed. We're seeing vastly more volume of data and sources of data than we've ever seen before. It's kind of this paradox, right? We're completely overwhelmed with volume and sources of data from everywhere, but we're inundated by the size of that data, but we're underinformed by that data. And I think that's the bigger paradox is in maybe the history of our profession. And so it's not necessarily focusing on one specific kind of data or source of data, right? There's because when you think about it, just off the top of my head, you got pre-participation physicals, which is kind of one data source. Is I'll kind of use. You got your EMR as the main data source. Then you might have some other peripheral kind of data sources that are incorporated. Say your concussion management system may be completely isolated on a whole nother system that doesn't talk to anything. So part of the strategy that I mentioned earlier that you kind of referenced is to find a way to integrate all those data sources, right?
Gotcha.
We're past the point of being able to succeed with data silos, right? And I don't know if you remember the old days of the paper chart rooms.
Yes.
Joke about that is kind of older senior athletic trainers, but just because the younger generation has no idea what we're talking about. But I use that as an analogy a lot of times when you talk about data silos and just completely disparate data sources. You walk into a paper chart room, and I'm just coming up with an example. Your boss or you might want to have the question, how often do we assume 100% of the cost on an MRI? Or what is patient satisfaction at RTP for grade 3 ankle sprains? Just a otherwise straightforward question like that. You walk into a paper chart room, you're going to be there for a month, maybe longer, right? And you might have to go to different areas of the hospital or the clinic to get different types of notes. So that's a kind of a gross analogy where, for us to maintain, for us as athletic trainers to maintain the pace that the settings that we work in are changing. I think we're past that point, and we need to have an integrated data system. So that's kind of the strategy that overarching strategy that we help organizations kind of mainly understand and be able to apply to their own environment. What pieces of information are important to asking organizational questions?
Yeah. Well, I remember being an athletic training student before I got in a master's of having to refile all the paper folder charts. So not that I'm that old, but they were still around in the last 10, 15 years.
It's shocking. Oh, yeah. And there is that still, I think, in athletic training. People are still like we do what we know, right? And and we stick with what we're comfortable with. And I know there's still a lot of athletic trainers that are choosing to document on paper, and that's fine if your purpose of data hasn't changed, right? For some athletic trainers, that purpose may not have changed, and they're collecting data for the sake of medical, legal, CYA, those kind of more traditional uses of data.
Yeah. Yep. Well, even the cybersecurity stuff these days, it's kind of like maybe paper is the way to go again.
That's another interesting conversation, but good point.
Yeah. So, in your years of gathering this data, whatever.
That's like tomato. Yeah.
I know.
You ask me, it's a soft A. It's data. It's data.
Data. Okay. So
fingernails on a chalk.
What are points of this information that we're usually lagging in most athletic training clinics? That's the most valuable.
Yeah, great question. I think I don't know if it's as much specific data points, but I think it's maybe more the quality and the structure of the data, right? And by that I mean, I think traditionally athletic trainers, from a documentation standpoint, we've gotten used to this open text field concept, right? Where we're just typing away a SOAP note, and we try our best to keep that SOAP note, because we have to do one every day. We try to keep it as short as possible. So I think things like unstructured data, so just a lot of free text, that's not that easy to deal with when you want to answer larger kind of questions across that integrated system. There are some technologies nowadays that can help with that. For example, there are some platforms that are available in athletic training and sports medicine that kind of incorporate natural language processing. So the same technology that kind of analyzes millions of say Twitter posts for say sentiment, that's starting to become available in some of our sports medicine tech. But more often than not, incomplete data and messy data are some of the themes that are kind of lagging, I would say, and it's still. I'm going to go back to that example of the purpose of data has changed. That I think is more of the culprit in us not responding to that. I think as athletic trainers, we still tend to exchange short-term. We still tend at times to exchange short-term convenience for long-term inefficiency, right? Where I'm doing my notes on a student athlete or a patient that just saw the doctor. I don't, instead of putting the referral in the system or documenting the X-ray or documenting the surgery, that we understand that information is located somewhere else. But again, that feeds this concept of disparate data sources. So when you try to kind of aggregate referrals and answer some larger kind of ROI and value questions about certain referral patterns, if that data is not in that system, it becomes very difficult. So those are just some themes. I mean, from a lagging standpoint, I think we could do a better job. I think as athletic trainers kind of recognize that. But with that kind of understanding comes the need to see that the purpose of data has changed. So it's kind of like this. I think at times we're being pulled in a lot of different directions, just with our coaches and our administrators and then our patients. And the thing that suffers, at least up to this point, has been the data.
Yeah. So it's the problem is kind of elongating the paper trail, the electronic paper trail. Is that what you're saying? Is
good example.
There's holes because you're not condensing it all, or not condensing it all. You're not summarizing it in every single instance that you're utilizing that data. Is that kind of the way that you're saying it? Okay.
So a good example, and I only use my own experience in more the traditional kind of collegiate setting, right? Mm-hmm. Where a kid comes in and needs a medical hardship, right? And I got to put together a medical record,
Yeah.
And if that medical record is now spread out over 10 sources, right? And where most athletic training, I'd say most athletic training, eccentric EMRs, you could put that in at the time at the point of care,
Yeah.
right? You can put all of those referral patterns in at the point of care, put allergies in at the point of care, insurance policies in at the point of care. So you have all the data rather than knowing that, hey, I only need to go to one place to do this. Where now, and I'm sure we'll get into the landscape changing in college athletics. You might have 5 or 6 kids now at the same time walk into your office and say, I need a medical hardship or I need a transfer, right?
Yeah.
I need my medical record. So, and I'm not saying that's across the board, but I think that's a reality for a lot of athletic trainers that don't have a hospital on campus that they can just send the kid across the street to the hospital and say, go get your medical record over there. Here's what you did in the training room, but then go the rest of it over the hospital. You might have to wait a week or 2 for it, but all the other data is over there. So, but yeah, so that's kind of example of what that exchanging short-term convenience of, I'm not going to put that in there because it's already in another system, for the long-term inconvenience of having to now go get that data from those other sources when you need it.
Yeah. And then, so when you're working with an athletic training department, what do you usually see when auditing someone's data, I guess? We already talked kind of about this elongation of the documentation. Are there other holes that you're seeing when somebody's documenting?
Yeah, let's see. I'll try to answer that from both sides of that, right? So the negative side of that, when you're kind of looking at someone's data strategy, and that can be data standards, or that can be the actual kind of output of data. You tend to, and I've been guilty of this in the past also, where I've kind of used the analogy of a messy garage. You ever drive by a neighborhood and you see someone's garage door up, just packed to the end of the concrete slab, and you just like, how can anyone find anything in there? Right?
You mean my father's garage?
I haven't met your father, but I think we're all guilty of that at some point in our life, right?
Yes.
We all find it, and because I've been on that, I've been that athletic trainer that's just said, right, that's just had the messy garage, and I think that's a perfect analogy to answer your question on that side of the coin, where it's just messy. There's no rhyme or reason why things are put into the system the way they are. There's huge gaps, right? And a lot of times the only person who can be of help in that situation is the person who stacked the garage, right? Because your dad will probably come out and go, I know where everything is in this garage.
Yes.
Well, he's the only one. So if he leaves the organization, now the rest of the organization is kind of up a creek, right? So that's the kind of negative side of looking at some of the data strategies and some of the data. And then the other side of it, positively, we just finished a case study with one university, kind of looking at 7 years of their PPE data, and they used a really popular platform for EPPEs, where the company does a really good job helping organizations handle the logistics of a pre-participation physical. I'll just sending a link out to the student athletes. Very good data collection methodologies in the application, and so they had about 7 years of PPE data, and we were able to pull out across the different domains of the PPE. So the gen med, the musculoskeletal, they had a couple mental health specific screenings that they did, and we were able to pull out about a dozen just based on the descriptive analysis. We're not kind of inferring anything. Statistically, we're just looking for possible trends to identify potential at-risk student athlete cohorts, right? So we were able to pull out about 12 to 16 kind of recommendations, kind of anywhere from, hey, make more fields required, right? Because that's one big source of bad data is just missing data. So you don't know if they just skipped the question or if they just, or if that question didn't apply to them. But just for example, 30% of your field sports may be at risk based on their injury history or based on their mental health screen. Outside of the high risk populations, and that allows them to kind of go back and potentially intervene and offer helpful resources to those lower risk, kind of medium risk patient populations that you might otherwise not know about. There's some good and the bad when you kind of look at it from both sides.
Yeah.
Comfortable, low profile, flexible, and easy to put on, the Vero ankle brace is simply the best ankle brace for those who move. And that's just about everybody. This brace is adaptable for any phase of injury recovery, whether you're recovering from an ankle sprain, require extra support for your day-to-day, or want to boost your performance. The Vero ankle brace delivers. The Vero ankle brace uses every movement and every step to give you extra boost. The 3-in-1 brace can be worn on either foot, making it the most optimal ankle brace for injury recovery and prevention. The removable stirrups, easy adjust Velcro, and breathable design adapt to your ankle as your strength returns, helping to protect you from re-injury. A dynamic support brace designed by leading orthopedic foot and ankle surgeons. The Vero ankle brace effortlessly adapt to your movements, offering dynamic energy return and support with each step. VeroAnkle.com. Check it out for yourself. VeroAnkle.com. That's VeroAnkle.com.
When you're going into these athletic departments, can you take us through the process of how that relationship is created, or how you're coaching them to start gathering the data, or how you're critiquing their data collection? How does that usually look?
Yeah. So our core service is, as I mentioned earlier, we get into the weeds with you, and we're helping you create a data strategy. Now, there might not be that first year might be cleaning up tech, cleaning up certain cultures, right? Certain cultures that relates to data standards. What are we collecting? Why are we collecting this information? How do we create an integrated system? So I think those are the initial kind of discovery phase, right? So and then once that strategy starts to take some shape and some form, then we do maintain a pretty healthy relationships with tech vendors in the space, including kind of EMR vendors. Not to get off on a tangent from your question, but going back to that purpose of data has changed, right? You can see that totally in the software that we use as athletic training now compared to back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And when I mean software, I mean more like, for example, concussion management, the PPEs that I just kind of described, but mostly the EMR, the legacy systems. We just recently, in the last probably 5 to 7 years, we saw kind of a consolidation round. So we lost these legacy tools like SIMS, which was a great tool for its purpose. And then we lost Presagio Sports, not lost, they were acquired by kind of a bigger player. So we maintain relationships with vendors, and the purpose of an organization securing a specific software. There's a reason why we would steer someone towards a particular kind of vendor, and it's specifically to meet their needs. And I don't know. Again, I only know my own experience, and some of the vendors that are out there are good fits for some organizations, but other organizations that have shifted that kind of mindset away from the past utility of data, and they're asking more difficult questions and newer questions of the data. Those specific programs that are good for some aren't good for those others, and so those are some conversations we have, and that's kind of how we build that kind of relationship with clients. We're building a strategy to meet your specific needs, and not a not just a cookie cutter approach based on the level of your student athletes or your patients or the setting.
Yeah. So this is a very complicated thing ultimately to try to gather all this data and make it readable to different stakeholders. For athletic trainers in general, not that we want to teach everybody your special sauce on doing this, but it obviously takes a long time to gather data, think it through. What are you trying to get? Do you think this is something that athletic training programs should start to implement? I mean, obviously we know how to gather outcomes and research, but it seems that now that we're in this era of gathering so much data, as you had mentioned, do we really need to start refining that data and understanding how to do that? I mean, this is basically another year of the program to be able to do this type of stuff, I feel like.
Do you mean, when you say programs, do you mean like educational programs?
Yeah, the educational, like the master's programs, should they start touching on this part of the data collection?
I 100% agree with that. Yeah. I think that's super important. Now, expanding on that, I think I should probably expand on that. Back when I was in grad school, we took a research methods course, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then then I think there was a research design course, or a statistics course, and then a research methods. I think that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And we learned important things on how to interpret data, or how to interpret a research study, mm-hmm. how to apply findings from a research, how to critique a research study, right? Specific statistical tests, how they're done, how they're used, what you might see in a certain study. But it was all based on how to consume the research, right? Mm-hmm. And we then, if back when there was a master's program where you had to do a thesis and you had to do the research yourself, that was the first way that we applied that knowledge that we gained in those two courses. Mm-hmm. Long story short, I think, again, I think it goes back to that transition of this tech world that we're living in, and this data economy that we're living in, the infrastructure. So back then, I shouldn't say back then like the 50s or something, but not too long ago, we as clinicians, we were at the mercy of researchers to give us new knowledge, right? To give us, to feed us new information, right? And it was resource intensive to do that. Right. The software wasn't commercially available to athletic trainers. We didn't know how to work SPSS unless you dove in that route and you went kind of the academic route. Right. We really didn't have the tools that we have now back then, not too long ago. So we had to lean on the experts kind of in the lab, right, that were controlling the environment, doing the legwork, and I'm not discounting the importance of clinical research, but I'm trying to connect the dots where now the rules of the game has changed. The cloud and the infrastructure and the software available is it's readily available, and it's becoming more cost effective for us to be able to now learn those same tools that we learned in grad school, but be able to apply it to our own data sets. I think we don't have to solely rely on clinical research in a journal to help our patients, right, or to help our student athletes. I was fortunate enough to be able to go back to my alma mater, my undergrad alma mater, and be able to. I'm actually teaching a summer course for first year MSAT students, and it's
Okay.
basically introduction to data analytics in sports medicine. So we cover all of the kind of areas of sports medicine. So yeah, I think it's important that we're exposing the next generation of athletic trainers to this knowledge set and this kind of new information. Just because I think the stakes are going to continue to go up, especially in certain settings, certain clinical settings, that knowledge and my contention that experience is going to be heavily valuable in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Especially if we continue to make the jump towards AI, and that whole other conversation that I probably, I don't know, but
we can do that one another episode. How about that?
Yeah.
So with this push or outlook of being able to interpret the data more realistically, how do we present it to other stakeholders a bit easier? I think I had put this under leverage. So using these type of data sets, how's the best way to leverage a collection of data to possibly incentive increases? Do you work with athletic trainers on creating data to help with negotiations?
I remember there was some discussion to be had about leveraging to potentially increase compensation. Was that?
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. If you've found anything when working with your clients.
I think that's a great question, and I think I don't know if I have the direct answer to that, but we can explore some ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know if third-party reimbursement is the long-term kind of answer.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways it's kind of anti the whole value model that athletic training was born from. And it's been a result of some very competitive times, right? And yes, it is a revenue. It is part of that revenue side, and I think as value-based healthcare becomes more defined, I think that's going to change that whole concept of third-party reimbursement, because that is, I think that was the reason why value-based healthcare has gotten some legs, is because it's designed to reduce healthcare costs, right? But I do think that the original concept of a physician extender, I think that, again, I was just talking to the chair of the physician practice committee. And again, I don't know if I'm using the wrong language, so I apologize. But that whole concept, I think was interesting, just the way it was able to leverage the bottom line, right? So just, I am not an expert in this area, but from what I understand, there were sports medicine organizations that hired athletic trainers to increase throughput, and I think I think we're now comfortable saying that definitely enhanced return on investment. I think it was upwards of 3 or 4x, right? And now I don't know, what I would imagine is more difficult for athletic trainers to start a conversation about revenue sharing that, right? Kind of around that extra revenue. And in some other settings, I think there is some tea leaves that might end up encouraging kind of more privatized model where you have that you see in certain professional sports, right? Where you're kind of leveraging your skill set directly to athletes. There's some people working on some different models on that. So I don't know. I don't know if I fully answered your question. I didn't start that with a confident answer. It was just more exploring some ideas. But
No, that's fine. I mean, I think the third party reimbursement is still one of those areas that I think the exploration of that is needed. I think athletic trainers technically can bill, but I don't think that there's enough evidence to really take hold of that at this point, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Or I don't think people are taking advantage of it. I'm not sure where we really are on that party line right at the moment.
Yeah. There's sorry to interrupt you. There was a I know in the traditional setting, like third party billing out of a kind of a traditional athletic training room. So like collegiate setting, I know that model had circulated through, I think, the early 2000s to mid 2010s, I think, and there were some companies that were upfronting some of that potential profit based on a calculation, and then the company would do all of the billing. But that did create a significant amount of paperwork for both the athletic trainer and the team physician, and I think that kind of goes back into that being efficient with time and all the hats athletic trainers wear. I don't think that was successful.
Yeah. Well, with your data collection, do you guys pull some of the ICD codes from some of these EMR platforms? I know when I was at the collegiate setting, you could technically put in the treatments or the diagnosis code and all that. I thought that was way too much time and it wasn't required of me, so I didn't do it. I just made sure I documented it all in my notes.
Oh, right.
But as we just talked about, the elongation of notes, is that almost too much information or inefficient use of the written note if you can plug in most of the information for the ICD codes or like those pull down menus, if that makes sense?
That's interesting that you brought up ICD because, and just to clarify, we're not taking any data off site. We're just helping. We're in the weeds, helping your organization build the best data strategy and infrastructure for you guys. That does sometimes that includes a recommendation on code sets, right? And over the years, I think ICD-9 was that gold standard, right? It was flexible for the insurance coordinator. It was difficult for the athletic trainer because there was 11,000 codes you had to work through, and a lot of it wasn't sports medicine language, right? It was healthcare inpatient language. It took you 10 minutes to find the diagnosis that you wanted. So I do think there's been some innovation kind of in that. Just a plug for your listeners. There is a physician, John Orchard, I think he's on his 5th, 6th version of a sports medicine specific diagnostic code set. They're called Orchard codes. Orchard Sports Injury Coding System. There's 10% of the volume of codes compared to ICD, and they're very more sports medicine specific. So it cuts down on the time that an athletic trainer has to search for a diagnostic code. But the main reason for, but if you're interested in a wider kind of system or strategy, you almost need a standardized diagnostic code set, because what you call a lateral ankle sprain, someone might call a calcaneofibular ligament sprain, and so yes, it's important to have a code set. We have options now, and I've also worked with clients that have built their own custom kind of diagnostic code set with some standard ones as the backbone, but and that was all designed to be sports medicine specific, right? And then possibly include some more includes more functional diagnoses, so, like functional movement diagnoses. So which we had to kind of create a kind of an algorithm for that. But to answer the other half of your question, I think when you talk about having a data strategy, and this is more the data governance side of the strategy or the data collection side of the strategy, there's a lot of argument to, pulling out, just to be an extreme example, getting rid of every open text field that's in the system, or keeping them to a very minimum, because to your point, you're typing for 5 minutes, but it's all kind of otherwise unstructured data. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think I was getting to the ICD codes because with the data that athletic trainers collect, there's always the argument of the return on investment. Look how much money I'm saving you. So that's why I was kind of seeing how many of your clients try to incorporate more of the ICD codes, or if you recommend using those to help with the valuation of what the athletic department is getting out of their athletic trainers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now we're one step further, and we're using that standardized diagnostic code set to potentially, to your example, having an athletic trainer put a cost, potentially a third variable to that, and say, this is how much I'm saving you.
Have you guys done that at all?
I think that's where we're currently at. I think in the profession, that's a perfect example of how the utility of data has changed, right? Gone from the past utility and the purpose of data where it could sit in a closet and never see the light of day, to now highly integrated data that has multiple data sources that can answer questions like that. I think I would love, it'd be great to see the profession start to incorporate a cost. It's and there are some platforms, there are some EMR platforms that help do that. The logic behind it, I think, is where we need to explore, right? Because and I was just having a conversation with a colleague about this a couple of weeks ago, and so my experience is from the college setting, right? And you could apply some of this now, I think, to physician practice, just because I think that model and that ROI equation has been pretty much proven. You could also potentially apply it to the industrial setting, right? Where that model is becoming more repeatable, where I think it's 5 to 6x, kind of having an athletic trainer in-house. The hard part for the traditional athletic trainer is that ROI model has already been set, and it's been in place for decades, right? Where the athletic director or the superintendent of the high school district, they feel that salary is the ROI, right? That's what they need to invest in to see the ROI based on the athletic trainer skill set, right? It's kind of and it's I don't know if it's a delicate conversation, but my whole premise, or my whole contention is that I think in certain collegiate settings, that's like I don't know if we can take that data back to the AD and say, look how much I'm saving you. Well, that's why we're paying you what we're paying you. And so I think we got to go a step further as athletic trainers and find new areas of value, right? New areas of that aren't in that current equation that's setting those salaries. Because if I wasn't in that role, someone else would be, right? So what makes me, Kevin, valuable in that role versus you, Shelby, right? And I think we don't know what that, because we're not looking at things like outcomes and risk profiles. Like, what are my outcomes compared to your outcomes?
Yeah.
I just hypothetically, right? I don't
Yeah.
know if we're collecting those data to be able to say who that person is on staff.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I've been challenging that notion of this ICD, ROI, whatever cost we're saving collegiate and secondary schools. Is athletics department isn't necessarily generating money, maybe Division I, but that's kind of a different setup altogether. But if we're not generating money, we're more of a cost to the departments. So we're not really netting out even if we are looking at a traditional ROI model in business, because
Right.
we're not making, the athletes aren't paying us, we're not getting that third party reimbursement. So we're not a monetary value, but that's kind of the value that we keep providing in these ROIs.
Right.
So
Right.
it doesn't make any sense.
I totally get your point. And
Yeah.
and we've never been on the revenue side of the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Athletics have never been on revenue generation, right?
So the only thing we're saving is the athlete in extra medical cost of what their insurance might not cover. We're
Right.
manipulating those numbers, not necessarily the employer of us.
Right. Right. And to your point earlier, I think secondary insurance is one of those highly targeted areas for cost containment.
Yeah.
Right. Because the AD has to write out a check every year for their premium.
Yeah.
That's premium.
Well, and we keep using that negotiation tactic. I interviewed one of the secondary insurance a few episodes ago, but we're not even approaching the secondary insurance portion correctly, because you can't really give a true, you don't have a crystal ball, so you don't know how many injuries you actually prevented. Right. But to actually decrease your premium cost, it's showing how incorporated of a prevention program you actually have. Right. And that's where I think we get confused on the word prevention. Is it's not really the outcome of what we possibly prevented. You have to show that we did the work to technically prevent those injuries.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. It's just like any other insurance. It's like any other insurance carrier, home insurance. Okay. Does your home come with an alarm? Do you have locks on your doors?
Yeah.
Right. So do you implement an injury prevention program? Right. Yeah. It's going to help you better than someone that doesn't. But then even more, taking your point one step further, do we know outcomes from those injury prevention programs?
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I think risk reduction and outcomes, I think, are the two kind of areas that we will ultimately be forced to kind of look at closer.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was assuming that your guys' programming technically was achieving, was connecting the dots on the thought process of why athletic trainers are doing certain programming, and then looking at those outcomes postseason. But your guys are kind of cleaning up that A to B, or ABC, I would say.
Well, yes, that is part of our value add to organizations. Hey, we'll help you do this. But as you probably know, the conversations I've had about outcome measurements, patient report outcome measurements in the traditional setting, it's no, we're not doing it. Some are, but some are focused outcome measurements around mental health screening, right? Not so much the musculoskeletal injury kind of outcomes, right? Yeah, we track outcome as a variable, right? They made a bad play. These are the number of calendar days they missed. These are the number of games they missed. But is that athlete back to their prior level of sport? They're the same level of sport prior to the injury, right? That's and that's where I think it starts to get into a different conversation. And so, yes, we are recommending that part of a strategy, but that's kind of the that's kind of the change of the culture, I think, aspect to this is that would fall under that.
Yeah. So do you get to hear where the data is shared from the athletic trainers after you come in and help them clean up their processes? Are they using it internally in their athletic training department, or are they presenting it to the athletic directors or the coaches or the strength and conditioning coaches? How do you see that these athletic trainers are utilizing the data and showing other stakeholders what they're doing?
Yeah. Another great question. I'm kind of in the middle of another kind of case study. The Pac-12 Student Athlete Health Wellbeing Initiative has kind of been on pause since the conference kind of what we know as the Pac-12 has kind of changed dramatically.
Yeah.
But I've kind of circled back to some of those campus administrators that we installed. They were already there. They were system administrators locally, and just asked a handful of them, how are they? Because we had to build 12 EMRs at some point as the conferences were, or as the schools were dealing with that. But how are they using the new platform? And the ones that retained that expert, or that kind of athletic trainer / data scientist, they are using it to kind of more end of the year coaches reports, and it's more that person acts as a resource for the staff.
Gotcha.
So you don't have to, if you're the track and field athletic trainer, you don't have to worry about putting that end of the season report together or that player availability report together. That person would do that for you. And so that's a couple ways that ends up going, I would imagine, to other stakeholders within that sport, for further discussion.
Introducing HuTape, the skin tone kinesiology tape designed to help you heal while blending seamlessly with your skin. Whether you're recovering from an injury or needing some extra reinforcement, HuTape offers support where you need it most without compromising your comfort or style. Our tape is available in 3 versatile skin tones, ensuring a seamless match for all skin types. No more awkward mismatched colors or feeling self-conscious during your recovery. HuTape isn't just about looks. It's designed for high performance. With its strong yet flexible adhesive, you get the support you need without sacrificing mobility. Whether you're dancing or working out, you'll enjoy full range of motion and all-day comfort. But that's not all. HuTape can be worn for up to 4 days. Going for a shower or swim, HuTape has got you covered. Find us at www.hutape.com and at HuTape_ on all social media platforms.
There are some strategies around secondary insurance, being able to better understand. Again, we're talking about the traditional setting, so better understand how insurance is spread through your athlete population. How many adequately insured athletes do you have versus underinsured based on your geographic location and some of the dynamics with secondary insurance.
Gotcha.
So those are some other ways, and then I think the hard part is, and this is more changing the culture again, is when you talk about risk, which is a big part of outcomes and a big part of, I think, value for athletic trainers in 2025. You can't talk about risk without talking about exposure or some derivative of exposure, right? And that's, we really haven't solved that problem yet from a documentation standpoint, just because I don't know if you've ever participated, or your boss, and I had some bosses in the past that would say, hey, you got to pick one of your 2 sports and you got to do the NCAA's ISS, right? And so basically we had to double document. So not only were we documenting our own clinical notes, we were also, at the time, the NCAA's ISS was a website that you had to go through, and exposure was a daily task, right? It's the event exposure, and then it's each athlete's individual exposure to that event.
Mm-hmm.
So not getting into the weeds of that, because that's another discussion, but that's a big data source. Exposure and is another big data source that we were starting to solve that in the Pac-12 conference, and there was some internal R&D kind of there, but that's a big, I think, gaping hole that vendors in the space and sports medicine technology hasn't really solved for yet, just because it's a huge time crunch for an athletic trainer to sit down and covers track and field and has 120 athletes, and they got to go through the entire roster and say this person participated, this person didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or more, it all depends on how accurate you want to be too, because we could get into discussion about the athlete exposure, and the long snapper doesn't have the same risk profile that the starting quarterback does, but if you only do athletic exposure, they both share the same level of exposed risk. So that is just a time crunch for athletic trainers, and haven't solved that just yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Well, very interesting stuff. Is there anything else you want to add that we didn't hit on? We kind of hit everything, I feel like.
Yeah. There was one that I thought would have been a kind of an interesting conversation, and we are putting the final touches on a coaching program or a mentorship program that's not an actual kind of in the weeds core service. It's more for athletic training leaders that or head athletic trainers, assistant ADs for sports medicine that aren't ready to make a commitment to an outsourcing partner, right? Kind of a business relationship where there's certain deliverables and there's a plan. These don't have a plan, but they need a plan.
Yeah.
So putting the final touches on kind of an 8-week mentorship / coaching program where we'll use their existing infrastructure, their existing problems, their existing gaps, their existing kind of headaches, and we'll walk them through, generally what it would take to things to think about, things to consider, things to make sure you have must-haves, from technology all the way down to making sure that your software can do these things. Comes to mind, making things required in a workflow. I think like every vendor should be able to provide that right now, but being able to turn it off, right? Hey, we don't want to force the athletic trainer in an airport to require them to fill out 35 pieces of information. We just need to get the injury into the system, then we'll come back.
Yeah. So
being able to toggle off certain requirements, skip logic, branch like conditional logic in a workflow.
Yeah.
So we're kind of putting the final touches on a coaching that should come out sometime this summer. You asked a really good question. I was like, dang, that's a good question. Is the data different for levels of athletics and athletic training? An AT is working at. There's a lot that's good about that question, because every setting's going to have their own metrics that are important to them, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, collegiate's a mess right now with things like NIL and transfer portal. Now you got this revenue sharing that's putting downward pressure on student support services. Mm-hmm. I do more with less. But in the industrial setting, so I think the college setting, risk and outcomes are still the main drivers for that value calculation. I think the physician and emerging, physician practice was just, like I mentioned, I was just talking to that chair of the COPA's physician practice committee. She was saying, we were trying to talk about outcome measures in that setting. I started with the 30-day hospital readmission rate. That's pretty much published everywhere in the research for hospitals. Mm-hmm. But I asked her, what's a similar metric? And that revisit rate or that re-injury rate. So when an athletic trainer does an injury prevention program and that person comes back with an injury that falls into the category of what you were trying to prevent, right? And in the industrial setting, I people are really talking about the industrial setting as like the next mecca for athletic training. I don't know if you've heard that. And it's they've established I think they've established a really good ROI mechanism. It's just a matter of that revenue sharing, and if they're paid adequately for that, if the trickle down effect, if they still feel valued. But there's a couple, I would think, nuanced ones. When you talk about the industrial setting, you're going to want to have metrics around workers' comp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Days of work, re-injury rates, those types of things. Cost. I think cost becomes a kind of another metric you would look at. So yeah, there are, depending on the setting, there might be specific nuanced metrics and data points that tell the story of value and ROI and outcomes better than others.
Yeah. Well, and I think people are excited about the industrial athletic training is that they have the parameters to be able to put cost around their services much easier. And I think that's going to drive up the compensation averages, is because they are getting paid more and they have more performance measures to what they're actually doing. So like a regular business salesperson, if they're meeting the metrics of the selling cars, injury prevention, or the return back quicker for that industrial athlete, not that I want to put metrics on health like on sales, but you're kind of, those data points are way easier to show, and the cost association, because those athletes are producing money. The dollar signs make way more sense than with a collegiate or high school athlete ultimately, where there's, like we had talked about, there's no money involved really. There's no turning of hands. So it's a socialized health program at those collegiate and high school levels. So it's, the flow of money is just not there. And that's, I think, why we're struggling so hard.
I think that's a perfect example of certain settings, socialized health, right? Is just, we work, I chose a setting that it was really hard to move the needle because the whole formula has been set, and you're not on the revenue side. There's really no opportunities to help the athletic department generate revenue aside from third-party billing. So now, okay, let's focus on cost containment. Well, we're not yet collecting the data that we need, and then if we are, the systems that we're putting that data on aren't helpful in giving us that insight.
And I think even if we take it a step further, you have more leverage with the high schools than even the collegiate setting, because the high schools have the PTA, so they can actually funnel more money in if you make a good enough case of what you're saving the parents in medical costs. I just don't know how many athletic trainers are going to PTA meetings and trying to advocate for what they're doing and showing them the data that you guys are kind of putting together. So it'd be interesting. I don't know how many high schools you guys actually work with, but that would be an interesting route to explore ultimately on getting that data together.
You wouldn't necessarily have a hard time putting that structure together either, right? Those athletic trainers that are in that setting, they're associated with an outreach program, could use the infrastructure that the outreach program has, and just modify the workflows to capture that data. So I think that's a huge modifier for that.
Yeah,
great. That one conversation was fun.
Good.
And you don't normally run across that. At least in my line of work as a consultant, you don't run into athletic trainers that are thinking that way. They're just complaining about the certain situation. So it's kind of fun sometimes. The other there's a couple more things. There was another question I thought was going to be the whole topic about money is the main outcome. that comes from data. And you talk about money or affecting the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And directly. And I just read an article the other day that the global sports medicine market, 6% compound adjusted growth rate over the next 8 years. So basically, that's doubling the market size. If you look at the numbers, we're about a $6 billion market. Now that's just global sports medicine. I'm not saying certain settings, just the general profession that we work in is expected to grow 6% a year over the next 8 years. Which okay, well, it's that's kind of promising, especially when you're on the water cooler conversations. It's like there's a huge dark cloud over athletic training.
Yeah.
And there's all these kind of foreboding signs, right? And so that was refreshing to hear. And then the whole purpose of that was the main drivers of this was novel treatments and rehab technologies was the main driver of that 6% compounded growth rate.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if so my point was the organizations that recognize, hey, this is showing that it could be peachy, in the industry, but we have to maintain a certain level of innovation to capture that growth, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of this idea of data strategy and data ecosystems and data analytics and sports science. But the flip side of that is if what happens to organizations that would classify themselves in that industry, or clinicians that provide services inside of that industry that don't incorporate novel treatments and rehab technologies. It's just it's kind of as fast as the world is spinning these days. I don't know if you put yourself too far behind the 8 ball to play catch up after that time frame. But that was something that I just finished having this depressing conversation about athletic training. And I needed some good news, so I went looking for the global sports medicine market, and So I mean, take that for what it's worth. Use whatever you want from that. But I thought that was kind of interesting. It's kind of a bright spot.
Well, I think it's one of those things of it's hard because we have athlete in our name, but I always see it as we work with a patient through the fan of their activity level. So the prevention, the injury, the rehab, the strength and conditioning, performance, the return to play, we see them through their whole lifespan, basically.
Yep.
And if we were smart business people, we would start looking at the older active population, since we know that the baby boomers are the largest population in the U.S. at least, and they are aging into that geriatric age range. A lot of them are still very active, as we've seen pickleball explode, which we're covering that specific activity really because it is sport athlete. But I think that, in these athletic training education programs, we need to start kind of having specializations in the type of athlete you will be working with. And I think we need to start developing the geriatric athlete, which obviously they are active in sport, but even, in the retirement homes, the communities, these little pods of older aged people, how do we start incorporating ourselves into those populations as athletic trainers to help them with their health, being a little bit more savvy on the older conditions, older injuries, that type of stuff. everybody's getting hip and knee replacements and shoulder replacements. So they're going to have to maintain that after surgery, even after the physical therapy insurance,
Absolutely.
lapses. So it's, starting to expand into that market that you're kind of talking about, the sixfold, is, I think there's even more opportunity ultimately. It's just we have to look at different demographics that we're not normally working with.
No, what I spent almost 9 years at a Pac-12 high-level elite Division I university, and it was like, I mean, it's easy to see what drew athletic trainers to that, right? It's but to your point, the skill sets that we acquire and the credentials that we require over the course of our career.
Yeah.
That's a paradox right there. We're spending money on our own to put more to learn new skill sets. Like dry needling to me is a perfect example of this, but we're spending money and time to make ourselves better clinicians, but that there's no translation of that into more. There's no translation of that.
We're not getting paid for those specializations.
There's nothing to say. Like, we don't even know if things like dry needling and these really specific manual therapy techniques, how they're playing into outcomes. Do they shorten the duration?
Yeah.
Right? Or do they improve patient satisfaction, which I would think most might, but we don't know. you know? And there, to your point, there isn't a translation into compensation, right? Because we don't know what that is.
Yeah. I think patient-centered care is very important, but that's I think one of the hardships we have to realize is, we can go learn all these different modalities so that, whatever works best for the patient. But I'll be honest, I've spent probably over $30,000 in certifications and manual therapy. I mean, I had a good reimbursement program at my old employer, but it's just that I'm still not being recognized for those necessarily. It might help with the hiring process, but not the actual benefits package that I'm getting in compensation.
Right.
But, I think the only thing that I have had leverage over was my strength and conditioning certification for a raise, which is great. Yes, that's very useful, but it's because we didn't have a strength and conditioning coach on staff. So I was just doing a little extra work, but it's not like the AD was like, oh, cool, you have, I don't even know, rock tape or kinesiology taping. No one else on staff has that. Let's give you a little bit more for that skill set. So I don't know how we start negotiating off of those type of skills, but nobody's really acknowledged it ever.
That's another good point. We never got to that in the discussion of compensation, but that's if like what you just described is a great example of an organization that understands the value of those certifications, right? But those are perfect examples of conversations we can start with our employers. Hey, not and I was trying to touch on this when I was talking about, it was like we need to go a step further when, hey, not so much showing the ROI on my position, but showing the ROI on me compared to the next person, right? Because
the competitive advantage.
Because then you have leverage, right?
Yeah.
If you're willing to walk, and they know, well, we can't let Shelby walk because she's the only clinician in 60 miles that has rock tape.
Yeah.
Right. That's where that I think is where we need to shift the conversation of ROI in certain traditional settings, because we'll never move the needle with an AD. Hey, look at how much I'm, and then also, there's always that athletic trainer that thinks more is better.
Yeah.
Right. And they do 250 treatments a day, and they're there for 15 hours. And are we shooting ourselves in our own foot? Because you do the hourly rate on that, you're getting paid next to nothing. But is it junk volume? Or is it? Why that term just came into my head, but Yeah. Those are questions that I think having a data strategy and having at least an intelligent way to approach technology and data in an athletic training organization. Those are conversations that I like to have, and that the company's looking to help at least move the profession forward in those areas.
Definitely. Yeah. The only other example was I had a newly certified athletic trainer, and she did soft tissue massage all day, every day. And I'm just like, how are your hands not dead? Like, there has to be a more efficient way, or some other certification, or give them something else. Go have them foam roll. There's the vibration gun. Like, be smarter in your application. And I think that's where we get confused sometimes is, all these certifications are supposed to make your life easier, but on the flip side, we're not being compensated for making our life easier, because if we were doing the hourly rate, her doing soft tissue would make way more money than me doing a 5-minute, telling the athlete what to do on their own. So the sweat equity portion of it, I don't think we are maximizing sometimes, but I could see way more athletes than what she's doing too. So I don't know what's more important to the organization.
Yeah. And those are questions that are unique to every business, and I think the more we see our services as business, I think to your point earlier, it's going to get it's going to get the wheels turned in the right way versus just being apathetic towards technology and data, which we're notorious for doing just because it's the straw. We wear so many hats. That's the first one that gets impacted. Is your documentation, and the data that you're collecting. But
definitely,
but we could talk for hours about this.
Raise the bar in 2025. Complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements early. Don't forget that 2025 is a reporting year for athletic trainers. Are you on track to complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements? Find out today by logging into your BOC profile at bocatc.org/BOC360. That's right, it's time, and this year is the year to renew your certification maintenance requirements. Check it out at bocatc.org/BOC360.
There's just conversations we have with friends and family. Oh, you're an athletic trainer. You'll know the answer to this. What do I do for this? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we've never seen the value in that for some reason.
Yeah. So, we always see it as like a drag. Because it's free advice we're not getting paid for.
And it's like, hey, do you know where I work? I'm with
we're not good at pitching ourselves of like, well, like, how about we go in the living room? If you pay me $50, we can figure it out. I don't think it's slimy at all. It's just how you present it.
Exactly. We have to make that decision in our head right there of, okay, I'm going to either give them the window shopping answer, or I have a decision if I want to really jump into this, right? And it might lead to an opportunity. You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's an opportunity to expose, I think, the athletic trainer as an allied healthcare provider to the community, right?
Yeah.
To your point.
Exactly.
Well, that went well. I thought.
Perfect.
I don't know, giving you some get a lot of information to go through. But
no, it's good. I didn't know that there were people out there that can help, utilize your data more efficiently. And I think that's important, especially since documentation is becoming so much more important as we move on, just with the legalities of malpractice and all that. That's important. But we're doing it. We have to do it. So why wouldn't we be more efficient and effective at it to make our lives easier and help with advocating for athletic training technically is what we're doing with this data.
Yep. And I think just just to add to your point, the technology is changing. I spoke a little bit about there's some legacy systems that kind of went through a consolidation. I think we're going to go through another consolidation in the market with respect to technology and some core systems that we're used to, like EMRs, and this new hybrid, this new EMR that's coming in. They're ready right out of the box to collect wearable data, peripheral data, right, force plate data. Like that's where this is going. And that can be overwhelming for an athletic trainer or even an athletic director. Okay, how do we make this step? How do we go kind of walk towards being data informed? And that's where that's where I thought I was going to be best serving the profession, is kind of in there, because my experience, my skill set is kind of really unique. So there are some on the vendor side that can help, but then they don't have the kind of internal data strategy knowledge or the healthcare knowledge, right? They're just they're a data programmer or an engineer, and they don't have that medical background. So I feel like we're kind of a niche kind of area, at least for now.
Well, if anybody wanted to connect with you, how's the best way to do that?
I think you mentioned the website, some helpful information there. Let's see, you mentioned the website, Preventicx.com, ICX. So and I'm on LinkedIn, and those are pretty much the two areas you can get in touch. My email, Kevin@Preventicx.com, ICX.com. I don't know why I have to say that constantly.
Well, there's an extra letter, an X at the end.
Yes, the X was more for the statistics and analytics side of it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on. It was very interesting to talk to you, and I learned a lot, and it was great to banter and talk about ideas. That's what I want out of the show.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation, and we'll talk to you soon.
Perfect.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daily, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.